The story starts at the altar in the town of beginnings. A young boy is on his knees and he is shocked as a man dressed like an adventurer asks him if he was an otherworlder. The boy is too stunned to give an answer and the adventurer knows exactly what that meant. The boy looks at him and then at his surroundings and he cannot believe where he was. The man tries to reduce his confusion by explaining what had happened to him, but the boy does not seem to be listening to him. He is checking out his body and feels his chest and stomach frantically, confusing the adventurer who asks him to stop and listen to the explanation. But the boy already knew what had happened, and in fact, he knew better than the adventurer in front of him. He was in another world called Iria, a strange and cruel world full of magic and monsters. The world had all sorts of demons and monsters and humans used magic and swords to kill them. Thus, this world was a huge battlefield where only the strong and the cunning survived. And the survival of humans depended on the adventurers and warriors who defeated the monsters. To help them with this task, the strange world of Iria summoned people from other worlds. The people it summoned were not just from one world but from many different dimensions, all having a unique feature. And right now, the boy who is our protagonist was in the place where the newly summoned people were called. He was in the central square of the city of Xenovis, also known as the City of Beginnings. It was where every otherworlder started his or her journey. The man asks the boy about him and his past life. He asks if he had learned magic or martial arts before, in the world he came from. But the boy timidly replies that he had not. He did not even know what they were. The man tells him that it meant that he was a no class, and the boy does not understand even this term. The adventurer tells him that it was not a big deal, it was just a term used in this world, and he would explain it to him on the way along with other things about this place. The boy is Lee Sungmin, 14 years old, who had come from a world without magic or martial arts. The adventurer seems like a kind man who tells Lee Sungmin that since he had met him, it was his moral duty to guide him on the right path. He could not just leave him here as this world was dangerous, and he would explain about this new world called Iria. He says that they could talk over lunch and he would treat the boy. Lee Sungmin appears very happy and thanks the kind adventurer. But as the adventurer is leading him through a shady street, he asks Lee Sungmin if he was thirsty. The boy says that he was a little thirsty and the man tosses a bottle of water to him. Lee Sungmin thanks the man for water and starts gulping it. But he does not swallow it and holds it in his mouth. Then he spits and sprays it with full strength on the face of the man, who starts screaming from pain. He cries, saying that his eyes were burning, and curses the boy. But Lee Sungmin shows his real personality to the man now. He says it was hard acting like a naive kid who knew nothing. But he could easily tell that what the man gave him was not water, it was goblin paralytic poison. He spits the rest of it out and empties the bottle on the ground. The man is shocked that the kid knew about this trick, but Lee Sungmin explains it to him clearly. His eyes are emotionless and the childlike gleam he had in them a few moments ago was completely disappeared. He knew that the goblin paralytic poison did not change the taste or color of water, and was a good choice to trick people. But there was a very faint fishy smell that it gave and stung the tongue just a bit. Lee Sungmin says that he was sure that the poison would sting someone's eyes much worse than that. Lee Sungmin says that he knew exactly what the man was planning to do. He was thinking of taking advantage of an innocent and young otherworlder. He would kidnap him and sell him off as a slave to some crazy rich person with perverted tastes. It was an easy way to earn money, and today it would not work in his favor. The man is crying because of the poison in his eyes. He is blinded by it temporarily and cannot even open them. He asks the boy how he knew about this. The man starts cursing Lee Sungmin and says that he was lying about being just summoned. But Lee Sungmin says that he was indeed just summoned into this world, and he was really a no class. He was not lying about that part. But as he moves closer to attack the blinded man, he tells him that he had 13 years of experience of living in Iria. Lee Sungmin uses his full power to kick the adventurer in the balls. His knee hits the man and he screams with pain even though the attack was from a kid. He is too stunned to even move because of the pain and becomes unguarded. Lee Sungmin sees his weapon in his coat and pulls it out. It was just an ordinary dagger, but it would be more than enough to take care of someone in his condition. Lee Sungmin stabs him and slashes him again. He asks the man if he had forgotten the golden rule of Iria. One should never trust anyone easily. This was a garbage world and the people were all wretched beings. Anyone who trusted others was a fool. And because the adventurer trusted the boy thinking that he was easy prey, he was going to lose his life. Lee Sungmin slices and slashes him again and again till the man falls dead at his feet. With the man dead, Lee Sungmin checks his belongings. There is not much money on his person and he thinks that it was a terrible loot. There was just one regular dagger with no special attributes and 100,000 Lee Sungmin thinks that it was not much, but it was still better than nothing. He could think of a few good methods to spend this money. But before that, he had to do something about the bigger problem he faced. That was his body. It was the body of a 14-year-old child, and it was as weak as it could be expected. When he had realized that he was back in the city of beginnings, Lee Sungmin had checked his body to see what had changed. All the muscles he trained to develop and the scars on his body that he got over 13 years of fighting had vanished. His body was exactly like when he first came to the world of Iria. His strength had been reduced to near zero. He had returned back in time, 13 years back to the past to be exact. It was the same moment when he first found himself in this world, and he had got to live that moment twice. Lee Sungmin thinks how could that have happened and can only think of one thing behind it: the special item he found in his last life. Lee Sungmin introduces himself. He was Lee Sungmin, a 27-year-old C-rank mercenary, but that was when he died in his previous life. In his previous life, he was just a nobody, a low-life mercenary whose life was riddled with hardships. He was not good enough for anything great and could barely make ends meet. He took whatever missions he could find and got just enough money to meet his requirements in the world of Iria. He had no talent like the other people summoned into this world. On top of that, he had no allies or friends who could help him change his fate. He spent his entire life as a bottom feeder and could not do anything to rise up. But it was not like that he never made efforts to do that. He had tried hard, pushing his limits frequently to change his life. But nothing had happened and he could only survive somehow. But he did not give up hope and kept trying, even though the chances of him succeeding were faint. His luck turned around one day and he discovered a new dungeon. He was excited to be the first person to clear it and reap the rewards. But that was easier said than done. It was very hard to clear and Lee Sungmin was severely injured by the time he cleared the dungeon. At the end of the dungeon, he found only measly chest. Lee Sungmin still had hopes from the treasure chest to get something incredible, but all he found was one strange rock. He felt that there was no point to everything he had done and he would never amount to anything special. But he knew nothing about the stone he found. There was nothing that could indicate its use and he could not find it anywhere. He decided to carry the stone around with him as it was better than anything else. If it turned out to be something valuable, he could use it or sell it later. Nothing happened with the stone till the moment he was about to die. At the moment he was going to die, the stone activated and sent him a message. The message read that the host was dying and now the stone of regression was being activated. He would be sent back in time. All of it made sense now. Lee Sungmin realized that the stone was really a precious treasure. It had sent him to past, to the moment his journey started in this world. But that gives him an idea, and that idea fills him with hope. He thinks that there was a possibility that he had brought along some skills from his previous life into this one. He opens the status window hopefully, but is disappointed on finding that his expectations were betrayed. His stats were the same as he remembered from 13 years ago. He was still as weak as he was when he first came to Iria. He had no class, no special traits, and no skills. All the hardships he had faced in the last 13 years amounted to nothing. But not everything that had happened after the regression was bad. Instead, it was a golden chance for Lee Sungmin to turn his life around with the knowledge of the world and its future. He still had the experience as a C-rank mercenary. And even though he did not remember every detail of what had happened, he clearly remembered the major events that occurred in the world. This was the greatest tool he had to change his fate this time. And being a no class was not as bad as he thought. There were some things that only people with no class could do, as the other otherworlders were tied by the limitations of their class. And for that, Lee Sungmin has to go to a certain place. He explains the class system followed in the world. It was dependent on the abilities and training the summoned people had from their original worlds. They were from different worlds and had different abilities depending on that. The most prominent of them were magic and martial arts. Mages and martial artists were the most respected and powerful classes, but they were not so common. The most common class of the otherworlders was no class, people who knew neither magic nor martial arts from the previous world. In simple terms, they were blank slates. They could learn anything they wanted and were free to choose any path. And they also received a special growth boost initially that helped them to get stronger. But it was not as sweet as it sounded. The no-class summons were the lowest rank warriors in the hierarchy of Iria. They were inferior in strength and abilities to other classes. They had no special abilities and their potentials were quite smaller compared to others. They could not face the dangers of the world like the monsters, hostile people, or the dangerous environments. As a result, most of the no-class summons died too soon, even before getting strong enough to get a taste of this world. Lee Sungmin was lucky to survive, but that was where his luck ended. His life was hell, and there were days he wished that it would be better to die. He lived a terrible life filled with hardships and humiliation for 13 years. He was always a nobody, a bottom feeder, and he died like one. There was no one to care for his death or to remember him after his death. He had left no mark on this world and no achievement that people would remember him for. But he was determined to change that this time. And Lee Sungmin knew the exact place he would start his new journey. He goes to Healthy Bone Realignment Office, a poor-looking clinic. Inside he meets an old man who was an expert doctor. Lee Sungmin tells him that he wanted to undergo treatment here. Specifically, he wanted the skeleton remodeling procedure to change his skeletal structure. The old doctor confirms if he really wanted that treatment, and Lee Sungmin replies that he wanted to. He was willing to do anything to become stronger. The treatment is complete and Lee Sungmin comes out satisfied. He has got one other thing too that would help him in his journey to become a strong warrior. He looks quite content and happy with what he had found. The first thing was the low-rank martial skeleton that he got by remodeling his skeleton. And the second thing was a book that contained the true heaven cultivation technique. These were 2 of the 3 missed opportunities of his previous life. He wanted to do them, but he was unable to, for one reason or the other. But now he had 2 of the 3 things on his checklist. And with that, he was confident that he could get much stronger than he was in his last life. He explains the 2 chances he had availed today. The first one was to get a new skeleton, or a low-rank martial skeleton. It altered his bones so that he could easily learn martial arts. Not only did the learning speed increase, he could become better at them than most people. The old man was an expert in the field of acupuncture, and he was capable of creating such a skeleton artificially. But some conditions needed to be fulfilled for the skeleton to be modified. The person undergoing the procedure had to be a no class and should have learned no skill. The old doctor did not take any money from Lee Sungmin. He did the procedure for free and asked Lee Sungmin to advertise his shop as much as he could in return. The process was painful, but the old man guaranteed that it was always successful. But Lee Sungmin knew that there was not much use of promoting him now. He would soon meet with an accident and lose his life. And in the previous life, Lee Sungmin got to know about this procedure too late. He had already learned a few skills before finding out about this process, and could not change his bone structure. And since the old doctor died soon after he came to this world, he did not know of many people who took advantage of his extraordinary abilities. All of them were no class, and this time he was also one of the rare people in that list. Now with the skeleton that could speed up his martial arts journey, and the beginner's boost as a no class, Lee Sungmin was sure that he would grow stronger in no time. The second life-changing chance he had missed the last time was a cultivation method. It was contained in a book that no one knew about. But what was cultivation and how was it helpful? Cultivation simply meant gathering internal energy and accumulating it. It was the basis of all martial arts and energy techniques. There were different categories of cultivation techniques depending on the stability of internal energy and speed of accumulating that energy. In his last life, Lee Sungmin had practiced an ordinary second-rate cultivation technique. He found a good first-rate technique quite late in his life, but by that time, the ship had already sailed. That technique was the true heaven cultivation technique. It was in a book hidden in the city library of Xenovis. No one knew about it except for Lee Sungmin, at least not right now. Not even the owner of the library knew about the book or the first-rate cultivation method in it. He thought it was just a regular cultivation book and sold it at just 40,000 to Lee Sungmin, which was much cheaper than its real value. With this book, Lee Sungmin had got 2 of the 3 missed chances, and he had done this in just one day. This was a good start. The third chance he could not get immediately. For that he had to wait for 1 year. It would be a prize for winning a tournament at the Xenovis Coliseum that would be held 1 year from now. It was a low-level tournament with only no-class people participating in it. But the reward was something he desperately needed. Lee Sungmin decides to grow stronger in this 1 year he had. But first he needed to worry about lodging. And he needed to earn at least 30,000 per day to take care of his expenses. He had to earn money while getting stronger, and there was only one way to do that: hunting monsters. Lee Sungmin walked around the city till he finally reached a roadside merchant. He was looking for new armor and weapons, as he was planning to venture into the forest. As he scanned the different items on display, the rude shopkeeper asked him what he wanted. Lee Sungmin looked at a set of armor that seemed light and cheap, and asked if it was his size. The merchant replied that it was, and added that the previous owner had died. Lee Sungmin selected the armor, as well as a spear and 2 daggers that caught his eye. He asked the shopkeeper how much he could buy them for, and gave him an innocent and cute look, acting like a child. The man asked him how much money he had, and Lee Sungmin told him he only had 60,000 . The shopkeeper laughed and shooed him away, saying that the minimum price was 300k. He told Lee Sungmin to go away and not waste his time and open way for other customers. But Lee Sungmin desperately wanted to purchase the armor and weapons, and he only had 60k while the shopkeeper demanded at least 300,000 Lee Sungmin decided to make a bold request and asked if the shopkeeper could give him the armor and weapons on credit, promising to pay the remaining amount later. However, the merchant denied his request, stating that he didn't know Lee Sungmin and he had no reason to trust him. Not one to give up easily, Lee Sungmin looked the merchant in the eye and told him that he was willing to sell his clothes instead. Lee Sungmin told him that he was from a highly advanced world, and that his clothes might fetch a good price as they were unlike anything the merchant had seen before. The merchant was initially shocked by Lee Sungmin's request, but then he started laughing at the boy. The contrast between Lee Sungmin's earlier childlike expression and his current serious, dead-eyed expression was striking. The merchant had taken pity on Lee Sungmin earlier, but now he saw a rough and determined attitude in the boy, who was willing to do whatever it takes despite being just a kid. When the merchant asked Lee Sungmin if he was a no-class and commented on his young age, Lee Sungmin didn't even flinch. The merchant laughed at the boy and asked him if he really thought that pity would give him a discount. Lee Sungmin replied that he had hoped for it, and he was not hiding his true self anymore. The merchant was taken aback by Lee Sungmin's audacity and called him shameless. Despite this, he agreed to sell the armor and weapons to Lee Sungmin on credit, stating that he didn't need his clothes as collateral. The merchant grinned as he praised Lee Sungmin's attitude and hustle, stating that he didn't think Lee Sungmin would die even if he was weak. He asked Lee Sungmin to become a regular customer and pay back the credit promptly. Although Lee Sungmin was initially creeped out by the merchant's words, he thanked him for the opportunity to purchase the armor and weapons. Lee Sungmin walks towards the forest, feeling prepared and confident. He knew that having armor was essential in the world of Iria, as it could mean the difference between life and death. Although the armor he had purchased was light, he knew it would still serve him well. He had pushed his luck to buy it, but it was worth it. In his last life, he never received such an offer, and something had changed this time around. However, he couldn't completely trust the merchant who sold it to him. In Iria, kindness was a rare commodity, and he doubted if the merchant had ulterior motives or if he was planning to betray him. Lee Sungmin knew he needed to be careful and keep his guard up. Lee Sungmin steps into the hunting ground and immediately feels nostalgic. 13 years ago, he was in the same place, scared and pathetic. He chuckles at the memory, amazed at how weak he was. He recalls the martial arts techniques he had learned in his past life, such as the lightning stride, steel-breaking strong skeleton, rock destruction palm, and soul-chasing spear. The system names all the techniques as he remembers them. Lee Sungmin spots a goblin and runs towards it, using the lightning stride technique. Then he uses the soul-chasing spear, first form, and stabs the goblin through its mouth, killing it in one hit with a powerful impact. However, he injures his palm in the process. He had used his left palm as a barrel to launch the spear in his last technique, but it was an untrained hand that would get calloused. But Lee Sungmin thinks that with practice he would get better with time, and he did not mind some battle scars. He smiles at the thought of improving with time. Even though the regression that should be a game-changing cheat was useless in his case, he now has a second chance to start anew. He is excited about the prospect of learning and growing in strength. Somewhere else, someone is meditating in a dark room. He is wearing a red robe and a powerful demonic aura covers him completely. He opens his eyes when he feels weird, like someone or something was behind him. But before he can even turn back, he vanishes from his world. It was nighttime and Lee Sungmin walked into the inn. The manager, Jack, welcomed him with a smile. Lee Sungmin handed him a pouch and told him that it was the fee for the night's accommodation. Jack took the pouch and curiously asked what was inside it. Lee Sungmin replied that it was the same thing as other days. But Jack's curiosity was piqued by something else. Lee Sungmin had a dimensional pouch which he didn't have in the morning. Jack guessed that it must be expensive, perhaps around 1.5 million. He asked Lee Sungmin where he got it from, and Lee Sungmin replied that he got it from a bald merchant. Lee Sungmin was his regular customer, and he had given him a discount. Jack praised Lee Sungmin for having a good sense of business and judgment of people. As Jack checked the contents of the pouch for the fee, he found goblin teeth and body fluids. He told Lee Sungmin that it was enough to cover his stay for another 2 days. Jack also reminded Lee Sungmin that it was pointless to sell these items to the Wizard Guild, as they don't offer a good price. Lee Sungmin nodded in agreement, but in his mind, he knew that he was not planning to sell these items to the Wizard Guild anyway. Jack was effusively praising Lee Sungmin, saying he was amazing. Lee Sungmin didn't understand what he meant, and Jack went on to explain that it took guts to suggest paying for lodging with monster parts. When the boy first offered monster parts as payment for his stay, Jack had thought it was the end of the line for him. He believed that Lee Sungmin, being a no-class and offering monster parts as money, would eventually die. But it had been 2 weeks since then, and the boy had been quite successful in hunting monsters daily. Jack was impressed and called Lee Sungmin talented, saying that a normal no-class could not match him. However, inside, Lee Sungmin was furious to hear the word talent. He knew he wasn't talented, not by any stretch of the imagination. As he started walking towards his room, Jack continued talking, saying that Lee Sungmin could be like Xion, a famous no-class. But Jack noticed that Lee Sungmin was heading to rest in a bad mood. He wondered what could be bothering the boy, and why he wasn't happy to be called talented. Lee Sungmin stormed off to his room, his fists clenched in anger. He seethed at being called talented when it was far from reality. Even in his past life, which spanned 13 years of struggle, he had only managed to reach a C rank. He gazed at his system, realizing that he had learned all the martial arts techniques in his previous life. He just had to remember them. That was Iria's special characteristic after all, learning by remembering. Fortunately, he was able to get back into the groove of things easily, but the techniques he remembered were all second-rate. With this kind of training, he couldn't do much. No matter how hard he pushed himself, he found that there was a short limit to his abilities. The only thing he has high hopes from now is the first-rate cultivation technique he has. The True Heaven technique was remarkable, and he did not doubt the benefits of practicing it. But even with that, he could not do everything he wanted. A cultivation technique was just a method of cultivating and assimilating internal energy, and sooner or later, it would come to a point where the user could not benefit from it. He would be stuck at a plateau soon with only the cultivation technique and no martial arts matching it. Lee Sungmin decides that he needed to learn better martial arts, most preferably some first-rate martial arts that could make him stronger, and with that he starts cultivating. The next day, when Lee Sungmin is leaving for the forest, someone calls his name from behind. He turns back to find a girl asking him if he was going to the forest so early again. She is concerned for him and asks that why did he always have to go the dangerous place full of monsters. She is a little angry with him and says that at this rate, he would die soon. The girl is Lula. She is the daughter of the innkeeper Jack. She is only a couple years older than Lee Sungmin. Lee Sungmin answers her questions and tells her that as an otherworlder, this was what he was supposed to do. He had to go out into dangerous places and hunt monsters. That was how he was going to survive and earn money. Lula is not satisfied with his answer at all and calls him an idiot. She says that it didn't matter if he was an otherworlder or a native. He did not have to hunt monsters for a living. There were many other jobs that he could do that would pay him a decent amount and also keep him safe. Lula suggests Lee Sungmin that he should work at their inn. He was young and strong, and even her father had a good opinion of him. He would have no difficulty in getting a job and could live peacefully. But Lee Sungmin refuses without trying to even consider the offer. He says that he was not suited for the jobs that Lula was suggesting. He could neither cook nor clean, and he had no skills that would make him a good housekeeper as well. Lula does not understand the reasoning Lee Sungmin used. In her opinion, a safe life was much better than being a hunter or a mercenary, even if it paid a little less. If he could be assured of his safety and a steady income, Lee Sungmin could live a good life. And he was young and could always learn all the skills needed to work at an inn. She had told it to him before, but Lee Sungmin always refused. Even now, he left without replying to her last question and said that he would be back by dinner. Lula is annoyed by his attitude. But as he leaves the inn to go to the forest, Lee Sungmin remembers the last time. He had no choice but to be a servant at an inn during his early days. He had taken the path that Lula was suggesting right now, and it had laid the foundation of his struggles later. He had served others but got bossed around and insulted by his employers. He would not do it again. He could, but he would not. This time, there would be no compromise on the things he wanted. He would take a stand and get whatever he wanted without looking to others for mercy. It won't be the same this time. He will do whatever it takes to become strong and successful. He would live a better life than the previous one and not hesitate in doing what is needed for that. Lee Sungmin is in the city square bustling with people when he hears the sound of the bell in the clock tower. It was the afternoon bell, and Lee Sungmin stops on hearing it. He knew what the bell signified. Another otherworlder had been summoned to Iria, and it was time for them to make an appearance. The summoning portal opens up and a young boy comes out of it. He is dressed in a red and black cloak and is the same boy we saw earlier. He was meditating and cultivating when someone or something took him away. Right now, the boy is confused, looking around himself. Lee Sungmin looks at him and figures out that they were probably the same age. Judging from his clothes, he was probably a martial artist. Lee Sungmin looks at the confused kid and thinks that his confused gestures made it easy for anyone to tell that he was a newcomer. And if he did not stop soon, some nasty thug would find him and try to take advantage. As Lee Sungmin was thinking about the terrible things that could happen, his guess is proved right by two men who approach the kid. They act like friendly and helpful men and start talking with the kid. Lee Sungmin knows that they were lowlifes who just wanted to kidnap the kid and sell him. They give the new kid a water bottle to drink and he accepts it without suspecting anything. The same thing had been tried on Lee Sungmin when he came to this world, twice because of the regression. He wonders if mixing paralytic poison in drinking water was the standard trick all the thugs used. But then Lee Sungmin decides that it was not his problem if the new kid got a reality check the moment he came in this world. He turns around, planning to walk away, but he bumps into a big man. He apologizes, but as he looks up, he can see that the scary-looking man was thinking of causing trouble for him. He looks angry and dangerous and tells Lee Sungmin that his collarbone was broken. Lee Sungmin cannot understand what the man was saying as he barely reached his stomach. But before he has a chance to say anything, the man punches him and throws him on the ground. The people in the city square gather around to see what was happening. But the man tells them that there was no problem that they needed to be concerned with. A mannerless child had broken his bones and he was just going to teach him some manners and a lesson. His words do not fool anyone, but the people still leave. They do not want to get involved in a fight that was not their problem anymore. But it seems that Lee Sungmin is in deeper trouble than he had realized. The people that were trying to trick the new kid and the one who was planning to thrash Lee Sungmin were in the same gang. They were talking about what happened and the man says that Lee Sungmin broke his collarbone. His companions say that he must mean rib bones and the man says that was what he meant. At this moment, Lee Sungmin realizes that he was in real trouble. The earlier hit was not a decent one. It was shabby and lacking in technique. The man had a little physical strength and no skills, but even then, he was a martial artist. Judging from the punch he threw at him just now, Lee Sungmin guesses that the man was a third-rate martial artist. There were different classes of martial artists in Iria. They started from third-rate, and then became second-rate and then first-rate. Above them were the peak martial artists, and the one who stood on the top were called supreme peak martial artists. This classification was based on their martial arts and the strength they had. The third-rate martial artists were the weakest of them all, and it was possible for anyone without talent to become one in just a little time. But right now, Lee Sungmin was weaker than even a third-rate martial artist. He had regressed just 2 weeks ago and his body was that of a 14-year-old kid. This body without strength or training would not be good enough to defeat the man. He knew that he could not do it alone, and the people of Xenovis were not so kind as to help a kid being bullied. He could not count on them, and since there was nothing he could do to run away, Lee Sungmin decides to save the new kid as well. He shouts to him that the water was poisoned and he should not drink it. The kid was about to drink from the bottle, but then he stops while looking at Lee Sungmin with surprise. Lee Sungmin thinks that the kid could also not be of much help. But judging from the clothes he wore, he must be from Muram, a world of cultivators. If he was from Muram, he might be able to at least look after himself. As the thugs look at the new kid intensely, the man fighting with Lee Sungmin mocks him. He says that he was a decent-looking kid and he did strange things. Some nobles with strange tastes would pay good money for him. As the man attacks Lee Sungmin, he thinks that he was not going to be defeated in this place. He quickly dodges the attack using his technique lightning stride and position himself to land a counter blow. He elbows the man with his full power and uses another martial art to increase the power of his attack. Lee Sungmin launches a flurry of punches on the bald man, but he cannot do any damage. The man is impressed by his martial arts but says that he was too weak to do anything at his current level. Lee Sungmin also realizes this when his knuckles start bleeding. The man was using martial arts to harden his body, and that was why no attacks were working on him. Just then, the other thugs are confident that they have the new kid under their control, and signal to their friend to wrap up quickly. Even if the security of Xenovis was poor, someone would eventually show up if they attracted attention. But even as Lee Sungmin struggles against the man, the new kid is awed by his determination. Lee Sungmin decides that he needed to use his spear against the man as other things were not working. As he takes out the spear from his dimensional pocket, he hears the kid talk to him. The kid asks him to repeat what he was saying earlier, and Lee Sungmin is shocked on finding him right next to him. But that causes him to lose focus over the battle and the thug takes advantage of it. He is about to attack a distracted Lee Sungmin, but the new kid from Muram casually blows him away using an energy blast from his palm. He is annoyed that the man was trying to interfere while he was talking, and Lee Sungmin finds out that the rest of the thugs were also already defeated. At that moment, Lee Sungmin realizes that the new kid was not an ordinary boy. He was already at peak martial artist level as he could use energy-infused attacks. But that rang a bell in Lee Sungmin's mind. He was a peak martial artist of the same age as him, and he was summoned around the same time as him. The only person he knew of that filled those criteria was the little heavenly demon, Wiji Hoyan. As Lee Sungmin struggles with accepting the conclusion he reached, the boy asks him if he could tell him more about this place. The demonic cult was the largest unorthodox sect in Murim. They focused solely on power and did not care about other things. In the demonic sect, the strongest cultivator was chosen the leader, and his child was his heir. The head of the demonic sect was called Heavenly Demon, and the heir was called Little Heavenly Demon. Wiji Hoyan was the little heavenly demon that was summoned to Iria around the same time as Lee Sungmin. He was already a peak martial artist when he came to the world and soon made a name for himself all over the world. And unlike him, Lee Sungmin was just a nobody and could not even imagine of standing in the same place as Wiji Hoyan. But right now, that famous Wiji Hoyan was sitting in his room on his bed. He introduces himself, and Lee Sungmin finds that Wiji Hoyan was 1 year younger than him. Lee Sungmin is shocked at the development and nervous around the genius, who is excited on learning about this new world. He laughs when he hears that there was no demonic cult in this world. Then he asks Lee Sungmin to repeat what he was saying at the town square, and Lee Sungmin repeats his lines. But Wiji Hoyan scoffs and says that he had guts to talk informally to him like that. Lee Sungmin realizes that he had to correct that and immediately bows down and apologizes, saying that he didn't know that he was the little heavenly demon. But inside his mind, he is embarrassed thinking about how he has to bow down to a 13-year-old kid. But Wiji Hoyan is amused and speaks to Lee Sungmin about his martial arts. He doesn't beat around the bush and tells him that they were trash, and he was not good at using them either. These words are a blow to Lee Sungmin, and then Wiji Hoyan asks him where he learned them from. Lee Sungmin is as confused as he is angry at the kid, but he can only ask him politely about his intentions. To his surprise, Wiji Hoyan says that he was going to teach him martial arts. Lee Sungmin is too stunned to reply and takes some time to process the information. But Wiji Hoyan continues talking and says that even if he was really bad, he would get better if a genius like himself would teach him. But there was one condition, and Lee Sungmin is scared about what it might be. Wiji Hoyan wants him to become his friend. That was an even greater shock to Lee Sungmin, and he cannot understand the meaning of his words for a long time, even though they were simple and straightforward. When Wiji Hoyan was a little child, he asked his father for a friend. He had read in a book that one could achieve anything with the power of friendship and wanted a friend. But his father tells him that friendship was not for people who were destined to rule over others. He was going to become the heavenly demon in the future, and if he had the time to read books, he should devote it to train. Wiji Hoyan was scared and disappointed as he ran away. But his father, Wiji Hack, realized that what he said to Wiji Hoyan was a shameful thing. He was strong enough to defeat 50 adults easily, even if most of them were average people. At such a young age, Wiji Hoyan showed immense potential and would one day surpass even him. But then he thinks that there was just one problem that would stand in the way of Wiji Hoyan to become the leader of demonic cult. But that was a thing of past, and now that Wiji Hoyan is in Iria, he plans to make friends. And Lee Sungmin is the first one to be his friend. But Lee Sungmin feels that it does not look good that he was 27 years old mentally, and he was befriending a 13-year-old kid. Wiji Hoyan keeps his promise and starts teaching Lee Sungmin a martial art called Violet Dawn Mystic Art. It was a special art of the demonic sect where the aura of the user glowed violet. But Lee Sungmin thought that he would learn a demonic martial art. When he voices his opinion, Wiji Hoyan gets mad, but at the fact that he was using honorifics. Wiji Hoyan says that since they were friends, they should use informal language. And even though Lee Sungmin is confused, he agrees, making Wiji Hoyan happy. He begins to explain about the technique and tells that he could not teach Heavenly Demon Mystic Art because it was a secret to be kept by the leader and his heir. But the Violet Mystic Art was the best one he could get. And thus, Lee Sungmin's training starts with Wiji Hoyan. 1 month passes and he gets a lot stronger than before. With more time, he would get even stronger, and he was already between 2nd and 3rd rate now. It was a development over his past life, but his friend is not satisfied by it. Wiji Hoyan thinks that Lee Sungmin was pathetic and talentless since he could not become as strong as he had expected. And when he reminds Lee Sungmin of that, he gets angry. But now they are good friends and do not mind insulting and being insulted by each other. But as Lee Sungmin is talking with Wiji Hoyan, a big monster attacks him. He barely dodges the attack and finds himself facing an orc. If he was not careful, he would be crushed by the orc's attack. But Lee Sungmin looks at his surroundings and realizes that the orc was alone. and as the orc attacks him, he thrusts his spear through his heart and kills him in one blow. The orc falls down and Lee Sungmin steps back looking satisfied with his performance, but Wiji Hoyin teases him that he was looking proud for killing a weak monster. But as Lee Sungmin is wondering how could an orc come to this area as they did not live here, he is greeted by a stranger. A man named Woon Hyeryung approaches Lee Sungmin and introduces himself as Orchid Destruction Sword. That was his nickname when he was in his home world, and he was an accomplished martial artist from Murim. But Lee Sungmin is wary of the man and asks him what he wanted. The man says that he was here to talk with the problem of the sudden occurrence of orcs in this area. And to discuss more, Lee Sungmin has to go with Hyeryung. A group of warriors are already waiting for him at the town square. A small-statured man named Du Sengryong is present there. He is correctly nicknamed Little Monkey as his features resemble the animal. He is doubtful about the abilities of the kid Hyeryung had brought, but the martial master says that he had seen the boy in action. Although he was young, he possessed great skill. Since Hyeryung is vouching for Lee Sungmin, the other members of the party have no objection. One of them is an assassin named Wang Pei, and the last one Rainier, a mage. They talk about the job they were going to take. An orc faction had established their village in a nearby area recently, and they were raiding villages and harming people. Some newbies had even lost their lives facing the orcs. The mercenary guild had put up a reward of 20 million for clearing the orc village, and adding the loot they would get from the dead orcs, the total profit would be even higher. They planned to divide it equally among all the members, and everyone would get about 7 million. Lee Sungmin is interested in the job as the reward is good. But the question is, can he trust the people he is going to work with? On that note, Lee Sungmin remembers that he knew something about the man Hyeryung from his previous life, and on the basis of that knowledge, he decides to join the raid team. Hyeryung is excited to have him on board, but Lee Sungmin notices two men sitting quietly in the corner. He asks Hyeryung about them and he replies that they were mules. They were no-class otherworlders and their only job was to carry luggage and run errands. When Hyeryung asks Lee Sungmin about his background, he lies that he was from Murim. The martial master explains that Lee Sungmin does not need to concern with the porters as they were going to pay with the leftover money. As the group leaves, Lee Sungmin asks Little Monkey about the orc village. There were about 50 orcs in total, but they would not have to fight all of them. And even then, it was an easy mission because orcs were dumb monsters. According to Little Monkey, this was a good job to earn easy money. Hyeryung explains that their plan was to split in two teams and lure the orcs out of their village. Lee Sungmin and Hyeryung would go in one team and the rest in the other. Once the orcs were out, they would kill them quickly. The mage uses her magic to spread their scent throughout the orc village to attract them. The team would be waiting in ambush and hunt the orcs. The rest of the orcs would be taken care by the mage, who would prepare a powerful spell while others were fighting. On the other team, Hyeryung planned to use a firework to lure the orcs out. Lee Sungmin thinks that the plan was not a bad one, even though it was a tad unrefined. But since their numbers were small, they could not do something better and simple than this. The group sees a banner with a skull on its top and they figure out that they were already in orc territory and decide to split up. Both teams take one of the no-class porters with them. As Lee Sungmin and Hyeryung move forward, he notices that the porter with them was tired. They had been walking for half a day and that would be tough for a no-class. He remembers his time as a porter in his last life and is disgusted by the thought. He asks the man what his name was and learns that he was called Brass. He tells Brass that he was not sure that if he could protect him in case he was in danger. And thus, Lee Sungmin gives him two options. He could follow them all the way or run away now. Lee Sungmin notices that Hyeryung was not even paying attention to their conversation. There was no way he would move out of his way to save a no-class. But Brass is sure that he cannot run away. The reason for this is well known to Lee Sungmin. The no-class who run away from battle while carrying luggage were severely punished. Brass did not know how would he be punished, but Lee Sungmin knew it very well. He had done that in his previous life when he was afraid for his life, and the guild made an example out of him. As their conversation ends, Hyeryung tells Lee Sungmin that they had arrived at the orc village. They could see the wooden fence around the village. The martial master is about to light the firework when Lee Sungmin suggests that they should do something else first. He takes out a pot from his dimensional pocket and Hyeryung is surprised. Lee Sungmin evades his question about where he got it and Hyeryung makes an evil expression as the boy is not looking at him. But then he asks Lee Sungmin what he was doing. Lee Sungmin replies that he was creating mud by mixing soil and water that could mask their scent and help them stay safer in the orc territory. Hyeryung is impressed by his knowledge despite his young age. Lee Sungmin rolls in the mud puddle he just created and says that he learnt it from his master. Then he tells Hyeryung that he should also follow him and the man agrees. When Brass asks him if he should also do the same, Lee Sungmin creates a new puddle for him. They light the firework and the orcs are attracted to it. Hyeryung has a cruel idea. He suggests sending the porter ahead to attract the orcs and then they could attack them from behind. Brass is terrified and says that he would die in that case. But Hyeryung looks down on him and says that he might not die because of the orcs, but if he refused to follow orders, he would kill him. Even as Brass is terrified, Hyeryung says that he was just joking about killing him. But Lee Sungmin is disgusted by his words and he cannot hide his anger. To subdue it, he volunteers to go ahead to attract the orcs instead. Hyeryung seems to have no problem with Lee Sungmin going ahead. As Lee Sungmin goes ahead, he finds that there were 13 orcs that were in their front. He rushes at them and starts killing the orcs one by one. He thinks that was he strong enough to kill all the orcs by himself. But that was not a choice. He had to defeat all of them because he had already interfered now. But he was not sure why he interfered to save Brass. What others might think of as kindness or mercy was actually sympathy. Even though there was nothing else connecting the two men, Brass was just a no class like him. And that was enough reason for him to want to protect him from unjust treatment. The world of Iria was ruled by those who were powerful, and the weak were oppressed. It was something that Lee Sungmin always hated, but if that could not be changed, he would become strong and do what he liked. As he is thinking that, he remembers the words Wiji Hoyan told him while training him. He told him the way to use the spear correctly. Lee Sungmin used the soul-chasing spear, third form, and killed 3 orcs quickly. While the other orcs are scared of facing the boy, Hyeryung comes from behind and kills the rest. One orc is about to attack Brass who thinks he is going to die, but Lee Sungmin comes in time and saves him by killing the orc. Hyeryung finishes the job by cutting the ear of all 13 orcs as a proof. He puts them in a bag as he thanks Lee Sungmin for his help. He thinks that the other group must be done with their part 2 and it was time for meeting up. Hyeryung throws the bag full of orc ears to the porter, and as they move back to their meeting point, Brass whispers thank you to Lee Sungmin. The other team has finished their job a long time ago and were relaxing as they waited for Hyeryung and Lee Sungmin. They think that since they were covered in mud, they must have faced some difficulty. But Hyeryung says that they had no trouble and finished things quite quickly thanks to the young warrior. But he is sweating profusely and his breath is also uneven. But then the atmosphere changes and Hyeryung says that the real problem was starting now. Lee Sungmin realizes that his fears were right as a dagger flies swiftly and lodges in the maid's chest. She is shocked by what happened, but then she falls to the ground. The assassin had killed her in cold blood. Hyeryung is also preparing to land a killing blow on Little Monkey, who is too stunned by what just happened to notice the incoming attack. But Lee Sungmin parries the attack from Hyeryung and saves Little Monkey's life, causing the martial master to get angry. He then remembers his previous life, when he worked as a porter for a short time. He was being bossed around by his employer when he was distracted by a crowd in the city square. His employer asked him if he had never seen an execution before, and Lee Sungmin is shocked on hearing about that. The man who was going to be executed was a cunning man from Murim who had killed his comrades to earn even their share of money. But he was caught red-handed and now he was going to be punished for his crimes. And right now, Lee Sungmin was facing the same man. Hyeryung expresses his surprise that Lee Sungmin was able to react to his motion so quickly. It was almost as if he already knew this was going to happen and was prepared for this. Lee Sungmin remembered his face very well because it was the first execution he ever saw. But Hyeryung is confident that he is stronger than the boy. He had witnessed his skills while fighting the orcs and knew his moves and his limits. As Hyeryung rushes towards him, Lee Sungmin thinks that Hyeryung was a second-rate martial artist. That meant he was a little better than him. But he could read his movements and predict his attack correctly. Lee Sungmin uses his correct guess to launch the first strike and stabs Hyeryung with his spear before he got close enough to use his sword. Lee Sungmin mocks Hyeryung and asks him who was stronger now. The man says that he was impressive, but before he can complete his sentence, he coughs blood. He is shocked why was he suddenly coughing blood, and Lee Sungmin tells him that it was due to poison. He had mixed poison in the mud before Hyeryung covered himself in it. It was a slow-acting poison, and since it was used in small quantity, Lee Sungmin assures him that it was not lethal. But since Hyeryung was sweating and trembling, Lee Sungmin says that he couldn't even fight with someone weaker than him. But as he is preparing to kill him, Hyeryung suddenly moves and takes Brass hostage. He tells Lee Sungmin that if he took another step, he would kill the porter. He was thinking that since the kid helped Brass earlier, he had compassion in his heart, and that was his weakness, as he could not attack someone who was holding a hostage. But Lee Sungmin is impressed by Hyeryung's stupidity as he walks towards him. He thinks to himself that he was a mercenary in his previous life. There is no way he would let a hostage situation get the better of him. But as he thinks about the reason he had helped Brass earlier, Lee Sungmin stops in his tracks. Hyeryung smiles on seeing his trick work and Lee Sungmin curses himself for getting overwhelmed by his emotions. He was already tired because of fighting the orcs and had little energy to spend. If he was at his best, he could kill Hyeryung before he could harm Brass, but that could not be done right now, and he was not sure how long the effect of the poison would last. If Hyeryung recovered from that, Lee Sungmin would be the one at a disadvantage. Little Monkey was fighting the assassin and their fight was also a close one. Lee Sungmin thinks to himself that he needed to save some of his energy in case the monkey lost and he would have to fight two men at the same time. But before Lee Sungmin can make a decision, Brass already seems to have found the right thing to do. He uses his body mass and pushes Hyeryung back after slamming his head into his face. Lee Sungmin is shocked as they fall on the ground and Hyeryung curses the porter telling him to get off him. But then he stabs Brass and he drops dead. But the relief Hyeryung felt was only momentary as he finds Lee Sungmin standing over him. He tells him to listen to him, but Lee Sungmin is not in the mood to listen to his excuses. He stabs Hyeryung and kills him in one hit. About the same time, Little Monkey had also won his battle and defeated the assassin while suffering some injuries. He looks at the boy to find him standing on Hyeryung's corpse with his spear buried in his chest. After that, Lee Sungmin and Little Monkey took the two criminals to the mercenary guild as well as the other two people who had died. They reported what happened and the reward money was divided among the two of them. Lee Sungmin returns to his room at the inn and he is exhausted physically and emotionally. Wiji Hoyin is excited to see him back and asks why was he so late. He tells him that he was earning money and then he lays down on his bed. Lee Sungmin is thinking to himself that if he had just a little more energy, Brass would not have to die. He had thought of not having any regrets in this life, but this thing was going to stick with him. But then Wiji Hoyin suddenly asks him if he had killed someone. Lee Sungmin is shocked and asks him how did he know. Wiji Hoyin says that he could smell human blood on him and that was how he knew. Lee Sungmin tells him that he was attacked by a second-rate martial artist and had to kill him in self-defense. But Wiji Hoyin seems to have realized something more than what Lee Sungmin told him. He says that Lee Sungmin was hiding something and he was now interested in knowing what it was. Lee Sungmin is alarmed at hearing this and gets up from the bed. He asks Wiji Hoyin what he meant by that and asks if he meant that he could not defeat a second-rate martial artist. But that was not what Wiji Hoyin was thinking. That was within the range of calculation. The thing he was curious about was that Lee Sungmin was special. Wiji Hoyin has been traveling the city to learn about the world and found that no class were at the bottom of the society. They lived miserable lives and often turned into beggars and other lowlifes. And humans hesitate a lot when they go to kill even a small-sized creature. But Lee Sungmin could go into the forest on his first day in area and kill monsters like he had been doing it for a long time. Lee Sungmin tries to evade answering by saying that it was just common sense. But Wiji Hoyin says that even though it was common sense, no other no-class thought like that. They were scared of killing and being killed, but Lee Sungmin was different from day one. Lee Sungmin tries to dodge Wiji Hoyin's question, but he is ready for that. There is another suspicion in Wiji Hoyin's mind. Lee Sungmin was talentless and yet he was skilled in using the spear even though he had used it for just 2 months. The words were a blow to his self-esteem and he cannot immediately answer. But Wiji Hoyin continues and says that he was not even a good student. But there were no signs that he was a beginner at using a spear. Lee Sungmin says that he had no idea about that, but Wiji Hoyin gets angry at that. He says that even though Lee Sungmin was his friend, he did not like people who lied to him. But to resolve the situation, Lee Sungmin decides to admit to the doubts. He says that everyone had some secrets and no one had the right to force them to reveal those secrets, not even friends. But Wiji Hoyin laughs on this and says that he had a secret too. If Lee Sungmin told him his secret, he would reveal his own secret in return. But Lee Sungmin is not interested in the least. But Wiji Hoyin is not about to back down and raises the offer, saying that Lee Sungmin would get a peerless martial art technique along with the secret. But Lee Sungmin is dejected on hearing that and says that such techniques would not be good enough for him as he was talentless and have little internal energy. Wiji Hoyin thinks that he has got the perfect bargaining chip to learn Lee Sungmin's secret. He offers his friend 20% of his internal energy in exchange for the secret. Lee Sungmin is shocked and asks Wiji Hoyin why would someone make such an offer. But Wiji Hoyin simply states that it was out of curiosity. He wanted to know everything about his only friend and that was fair. Lee Sungmin gives up and asks Wiji Hoyin to promise one thing. He would not kill him on learning his secret. But Wiji Hoyin is confused why would Lee Sungmin make such a stupid request. But with the agreement about exchanging secrets made, Wiji Hoyin feels the need to go first. Wiji Hoyin takes off the hairband revealing long flowing hair and tells Lee Sungmin that she was a girl. Lee Sungmin had had a long day full of many twists, but this surprise was the mother of all the twists. He is so shocked that Wiji Hoyan is annoyed at him. She explains that it was all because of her father who told her to act like a boy. Only men could become the leaders of the demonic sect. That is why her father told her to act like a boy and become his successor. And since she was already used to acting like a boy, she had no reason to become a girl here. Lee Sungmin has still not gotten over the shock he received on learning that Wiji Hoyan was a girl. He only knew about Wiji Hoyan in his last life from rumors, and none of them mentioned that she was a girl. Wiji Hoyan asks him to tell his secret now, and Lee Sungmin asks her to give him a minute to gather his thoughts and calm his mind. But before that, he tells her that they should use separate bedrooms from tomorrow, and Wiji Hoyan does not understand the reason for that. With that, Lee Sungmin takes a few deep breaths and reveals his secret to Wiji Hoyan. He tells her that he was a regressor, someone who had returned to the past after his death. That is the end of the first part of the video. Wiji Hoyan being a girl was a nasty surprise. Imagine calling her he and a boy throughout the video only to find that she was a girl. But other than that, how will Lee Sungmin and her friendship fare after learning his secret? How much will he benefit from her internal energy and the special technique? Stay tuned to find the answer.